My name is Wren Halloran. I'm 31 years old, and 3 weeks ago at my cousin's retirement party, my mother stood up in a room full of people, looked right past me, and told everyone, "Oh, and that's my niece in the back. She drives a delivery van." My uncle laughed and added, "Somebody's gotta do it." The room did that thing rooms do, that soft, polite chuckle where nobody actually finds it funny, but everybody agrees to pretend. But there was one man at the head table who didn't laugh. His name is Augustus Pellini, and he'd flown in from Cleveland to honor my cousin, and when his eyes dropped to my right forearm, to the long, shiny burn scar that runs from my wrist almost to my elbow, his whole face went still. He set down his fork. He stood up, and he said, quiet but clear so the whole table could hear it, "I'm sorry, but I have to ask, where did you get that scar?" I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know what he knew. What happened in the next 10 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own life. Not loudly. The truth almost never comes loudly. If you want to hear how it happened, stay with me. Drop a comment, tell me what city you're in and what time it is there, and let's go back to the beginning, because that's the only way any of this makes sense. There were 16 photographs on the staircase wall in the house I grew up in. I counted them once when I was maybe 12, on a rainy Saturday when everyone else had gone to my cousin's softball tournament and I'd been left home with a cold. 16 frames climbing up the wall in a neat diagonal line. I was in 2 of them. Both group shots. One was Thanksgiving when I was 7, and I'm at the very edge, half my face cut off by the frame. The other was a family reunion where you can only tell it's me because of the yellow dress. My cousin Beatrice had 11 of those 16 frames to herself. Dance recitals, honor roll certificates turned into wall art, a senior portrait the size of a window lit by its own little brass lamp that my aunt actually plugged in. I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me. I gave up on pity a long time ago. I'm telling you because that staircase is where this whole thing really begins. The house was in Hartwell, a small lake town up in northeast Georgia. The kind of place where everybody's grandfather knew everybody else's grandfather, and people still bring casseroles when somebody dies. My Aunt Coraline ran that house like it was a stage set. Fresh flowers on the entry table whether or not anyone was coming. The good towels nobody was allowed to use. A welcome mat she swapped out by season. From the road it looked like the happiest house on the street. I grew up there because my mother, Loralee, never quite got her feet under her, and when I was 4 she moved us both into her sister Coraline's house, just for a little while. We never left. So I was raised by 2 sisters who agreed on almost nothing except one thing, which was that Beatrice was the future and I was the favor. Coraline's husband, my Uncle Dorsey, sold farm equipment and had a laugh. You could hear 2 rooms away, and he liked me fine, the way you like a dog that doesn't bark too much. Nobody in that house was cruel exactly. That was the part that made it so hard to explain to anyone later. There was no monster, just 1,000 small arrangements that all pointed the same direction, and the direction was never me. My mother had a particular way of talking about me to other people, like I was a problem she was being patient about. At church, at the salon, on the phone in the kitchen with the cord stretched as far as it would go. Wren's still figuring herself out, bless her heart. Not everybody's a Beatrice. She'd say it with a soft little laugh, and people would nod like they understood, and somewhere in those conversations a version of me got built that I had to walk into every single room already wearing. I was 16 when I heard her say the thing I never forgot. I'd come home early from a babysitting job because the family canceled and the kitchen door was open and she was on the phone with her sister even though they lived in the same house, which tells you everything. She said, "I just don't want to put more into her than I'll ever get back, you know. Beatrice is an investment. Wren's more of a charity case." I stood in the hallway with my house key still in my hand. I didn't cry. I think that was the day I stopped being able to. I just went up to the room I shared with the ironing board and the off-season decorations, and I made myself a quiet promise that I would never again wait for someone in that house to decide I was worth something. I moved out at 18 with $400 in a duffel bag. The week after high school graduation, a ceremony nobody from my family attended because it landed on the same day as Beatrice's college send-off party. I left a note on the counter that said I'd call when I was settled. I did call. They picked up. Life rearranged itself around the hole where I used to be, and honestly, I'm not sure they noticed the draft. For the next 2 years, I worked like it was the only thing keeping me alive, because it kind of was. Overnight stocking at a grocery warehouse, weekend shifts at a diner off the interstate, and the job that turned into everything, driving a delivery route for a little courier company in Athens. 40 miles a day, then 60, then 100. I learned that town and the 3 counties around it the way you learn a person you love, by the back roads, by which bridges flooded, by which loading docks had a guy who'd help you and which ones made you carry it all yourself. I was taking night classes at the technical college whenever I could afford the gas, logistics, and business. An accounting course I failed once and retook because I refused to let it beat me. I kept a little spiral notebook in those years, the kind with the wire that catches on everything. Income on the left, what I owed on the right, and at the bottom of every single page a total that I made absolutely sure never dipped into red. Some weeks that meant ramen for 6 days straight. I still have that notebook. The cover's held on with tape now. By the time I was 23, I had $9,000 saved and an idea I couldn't shake. I'd been on the inside of dozens of delivery operations and I could see exactly where they bled money. Routes that doubled back on themselves. Drivers. Nobody trained. Owners who didn't understand the one thing I understood in my bones, which was that the whole business lived or died on whether a tired person at the end of a long day was treated like a human being. I heard about a courier outfit going under. 3 vans and a handful of contracts, the owner sick and wanting out. He was asking $35,000. I offered him $26,000, everything I had plus a small business loan I qualified for entirely on my own, because when I'd asked my uncle to co-sign 1 year earlier, he'd said he'd look into it and never did. The man took my offer. I sat in the gravel lot in my car afterward for about 10 minutes, not celebrating, just breathing the way you breathe when something you wanted so long is suddenly real and heavy in your hands. Then I drove to the bank and opened a business account and wrote down the name I'd already chosen months before. Halloran Logistics. My mother's maiden name, technically, but I never thought of it as hers. It was mine first the way I figured it. The only thing from that family I ever wanted to keep. If you've ever built something quiet that the people closest to you knew nothing about, do me a favor and drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I read them. Here's the thing I have to explain, and I want to be careful because it sounds colder than it was. As the company grew, I made a choice not to tell my family. Not out of spite. It was something more deliberate than spite. I had spent my whole childhood watching exactly how that family treated things of value. How love turned into a transaction the second money entered the room. I knew with a certainty that took me years to earn it if I told them I'd built something, the something would become the only thing they saw. They'd want in. They'd want the story. Our Wren, look what she did. At the church potlucks, my success folded neatly into their reputation. And I would never ever know if they finally saw me, or if they just upgraded my category from charity case to asset, so I gave them nothing to upgrade. When anyone asked, I said I drove a van, which was true, because for the first 3 years I drove a route myself every single morning before the sun came up, and I never stopped believing you couldn't run a thing you didn't understand from the inside. The route I drove longest ran out toward the lake and the old industrial park on the north end of the county. Cold mornings out there are something else. Fog coming up off the water, your headlights catching it like a wall. It was on one of those mornings, January, a few years back, that everything I'd never told anyone happened. I came around the bend on the county road by the marina around 6:40 in the morning, still mostly dark, and there was a car off the road in the ditch, nose down, hazards barely blinking like the battery was already going. I almost didn't stop. I want to be honest about that. I had a full van and a tight schedule, and a part of me that had learned the world doesn't usually stop for me, so why should I? But I stopped. There was a man inside, older, slumped against the wheel, and the front of the car was crushed into the embankment, and there was smoke. Not flames yet, but that ugly gray smoke that means flames are coming, and they don't ask permission. The driver's door was jammed. I could see him moving, just barely, his head turning. I checked the time without thinking, 6:43, the way you do when some animal part of your brain starts keeping a record. I got the passenger door open. The smoke was thicker by then, and it caught in my throat. His seatbelt had locked up tight across him, and I couldn't reach the buckle clean, so I had a folding knife I kept in the door pocket, and I cut it, sawing at the strap while he kept saying something I couldn't make out. I got an arm under him, and I pulled, and the angle was wrong. Everything was wrong, the car nose down and me half standing in a ditch. On the second pull, his weight shifted, and a piece of the dash that had buckled and torn caught my right arm. Dragged across it, and there was heat, real heat, because by then there were flames coming up under the hood and the metal near them had been cooking. I felt it more than I understood it. I didn't stop. I got him up and out and dragged him backward up the embankment to the grass on the far side, both of us coughing, my arm screaming in a way I was choosing not to listen to. The car went up maybe a minute later, properly, a sound like a hard cough, and then a roar. I called 911 at 6:51. I sat with him in the wet grass, and I kept him talking, asked him his name even though I couldn't really hear his answer over the ringing in my own ears. Just kept saying, "Stay with me, sir. Help's coming." His glasses were gone, and there was blood at his hairline, but his eyes were tracking me. He reached over with a shaking hand and gripped my wrist, the unburned one, and just held on. When I heard the sirens come down the county road, I did something I've thought about 1,000 times since. I got up and I went back to my van. The paramedics were pulling in, and a deputy was right behind them, and there were going to be questions and forms and my name in a report, and my photo maybe in the little county paper. And I want to tell you I had some noble reason, but I didn't. The truth is that some part of me, the part that grew up edge of the frame, just didn't know how to stand there and be seen. Didn't believe being seen ever turned out well for me. So I drove off and finished my route with one hand mostly, and at the next stop I wrapped my arm in a clean shop rag, and I didn't go to the urgent care until that night, and the doctor was angry with me, and the burn left the scar I've carried ever since, a long shiny ridge from wrist to elbow. I never told my family. I never told anyone. Some things you just carry by yourself. By the time I was 26, Halloran Logistics had 19 vans, and we'd crossed $1 million a year. By 28, we'd added warehousing and contract fulfillment, and I'd moved us into a real building on the south side of Athens with my name in steel letters on the front that I bolted up myself on a Sunday when the street was empty, standing back on the sidewalk afterward for a long minute just looking at it. By the time I turned 31, the December all this came to a head. We had 61 employees. We were doing around $4.2 million in annual revenue, and we'd just been shortlisted for the regional distribution contract for a company expanding hard across the Southeast. My family knew none of it. To them, I was still the one who drove a van. The company doing that expansion was Pellini Freight Group, out of Ohio, and in our world that name carried weight. 40 years old, family built, the kind of reputation you can't buy. We'd actually been doing last-mile fulfillment for 2 of their southern accounts for almost a year and a half by then, all through brokers and account managers, formal channels, nothing personal. I had never once spoken to the man whose name was on the building. He was a signature on a contract. I was a signature on a contract. The work was the only conversation we were having, and neither of us knew we were having it. The invitation to Beatrice's retirement party, no, my cousin's retirement party, came in the mail on heavy cream cardstock that I knew Coraline bought in bulk. Beatrice had taken an early buyout from a hospital administration job. The kind of thing our family threw parties for. In the corner, in my aunt's handwriting, were the words "cocktail attire, please." I read that twice. I almost didn't go. I sat with it for 3 days, weighing what it would cost me against what I had in reserve to spend. Then Beatrice herself called me, which she only did when it mattered, and she said, "Wren, I actually want you there. Not for Mom. For me. You're my cousin, and I haven't been a good one, and I'd like to start over." There was something real in it I wasn't used to, and against my better judgment, I said yes. The party was at a restored mill on the river, a place with brick walls and string lights and big timber beams, the nicest event space in 3 counties. I'd actually bid on the logistics contract to supply that venue 2 years earlier and lost it to a bigger outfit, and I remember thinking at the time that I could outwork them eventually. I got there 12 minutes late on purpose because I didn't want to be standing by the door while my aunt managed everyone's arrival. A young man took my keys for valet. I walked in alone in a simple dark green dress I'd picked out myself. Nothing that invited comment, and I found my place card at a table in the back corner by the kitchen doors, between a great aunt who didn't recognize me and an empty chair. The head table was all light. Beatrice, genuinely happy, her hand on her husband's. My Aunt Coraline, in full performance, turned toward the guest of honor with her best posture. My uncle telling a story with his big laugh. My mother beside them, in her element. And across from them sat a man I'd never seen, mid-60s, silver hair, a stillness about him that was different from everyone else's. Everyone else in that room was performing attention. He was just there. I looked at him for a second too long and then looked down at my menu. The toast started around 7:30. Coraline rose and said lovely things about Beatrice she'd clearly practiced. She introduced my uncle, 34 years and counting. She introduced Beatrice's husband. She introduced the man with the silver hair as our dear friend Augustus, who came all the way from Cleveland. And then her gaze swept the room and snagged on me in the corner, and there was a pause, just a beat. The kind only people trained their whole lives to notice would notice, and she said, "Oh, and that's my niece, Wren, in the back. She drives a delivery van." And my uncle, warm and easy, said, "Somebody's gotta do it." The room did its polite ripple. I sat very still and held my water glass and looked at the candle on the table and did what I had done 100 times, which is let it pass through me without grabbing on. I'd gotten good at that. The art of being smaller than a sentence, and then, in the quiet after, I noticed something missing, the sound I expected, Augustus completing the social contract with a chuckle and letting the moment die. It never came. I looked up. He wasn't looking at my aunt. He was looking across the room, past 2 tables, straight at my right arm. I had it resting along the edge of the table, sleeve pushed up the way I always wear it, because pretending it isn't there takes more energy than I have. The burn scar was right there in the light. He was looking at it the way you look at a word in a language you thought you'd forgotten. He set his fork down, deliberately, not dropped, set. And then he stood up. No throat-clearing, no apologetic glance. He just rose, the whole table noticing. My aunt's smile holding its shape while her eyes went sharp, and he looked at me. Only at me, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I have to ask, where did you get that scar?" My mother started to say his name. He'd already turned toward the side doors that led out to the deck over the river. I set my glass down on the white tablecloth. I stood up, and I followed him. Before I tell you what he said out there, if any part of this is landing somewhere real for you, hit subscribe, because this is where it turns. The deck ran along the back of the mill, over the dark water, strung with little lights, nobody out there but the 2 of us, and the cold coming up off the river. He stood at the railing with his hands in his coat pockets, and when the door shut behind me, he turned. I stopped a few feet off, arms crossed, the old automatic posture of someone taught to take up less room. I built 3 or 4 versions of this conversation on the walkout. Something about the Polini accounts. A concern he wanted to raise quietly. I had not built the version that actually happened, he said. "Forgive me for pulling you away." I said it was fine. He looked at my arm again, openly this time. 3 years ago last month, he said. I drove off a county road by a lake in North Georgia at 6:40 in the morning. My car caught fire. Someone cut my seatbelt and pulled me out and stayed with me until the ambulance came, and then she was gone before anyone could get her name. He paused. She burned her arm doing it, her Maymont, her right arm, the paramedic told me. He saw the wound. The lights on the deck moved a little in a breeze I hadn't felt until right then. I spent 2 years trying to find her, he said. I hired somebody. There was a security camera at the marina across the road, but the picture was no good, all fog and dark. You couldn't make out a face. The one thing it caught, when she came around the front of the van, was a delivery company logo on the door. That's all I had. A logo. He looked at me. It took my investigator a long time to track down which courier ran that route on that morning back then. Most of them had gone out of business or changed hands. I didn't say anything. I couldn't exactly. Was it you? He said. It wasn't really a question. I said, yes. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, the kind that comes out of you when something you've carried for years finally sets down. And then I watched his face do the thing again, that quiet rearranging but sharper now. When my man finally identified the courier, he said slowly, the company had been bought by a young woman who built it into something. We'd actually contracted that same company for our southern fulfillment, more than a year ago now. I never connected it. Why would I? He took out his phone, navigated to something, turned the screen toward me. An email thread, the most recent from a few months back, a single highlighted line in an account review. On-time rate exceptional. Recommend full renewal. Expand if possible. Halloran Logistics, he said. You're Halloran. The deck was very quiet. I said, yes. He put the phone away. You've been moving freight for me for a year and a half, he said. Your numbers are the reason your name is on the short list for our whole Southeast expansion. 14 new markets over the next 2 years. I came down here for your cousin because her husband and I go back 40 years. I had no idea. He shook his head slowly. I sat across the table from your family tonight and listened to them tell me who you are. I need to stop and try to tell you what that did to me. And I don't know that I can. I have been looked at with pity. I have been looked at and filed away. I have walked into rooms already defined by other people's small sentences about me, but I had never once in 31 years been looked for, not like that. Not by someone who spent 2 years in real money trying to find me, who sat across from the people who just told him I was the niece who drives a van, and recognized in a scar on my arm something they'd never bothered to ask about. I said, I didn't know you were looking. He said, I know you didn't. That's exactly why I had to be the one to find you. We stood there a moment. The music from inside was faint and steady. Then he said there was something else, and his voice changed into the register of a man who'd run 1,000 meetings. He told me he'd been choosing between 3 companies for the expansion. He'd been working the list since the fall. Tonight, he said, I took your company off that list and put it in a different category. I want to make you our primary partner for the whole expansion. 3-year term to start. Integrated, equity-aligned, not a vendor. A partner. He let that sit. The value over those 3 years would be somewhere north of $5 million. Then he said, careful and clear, and I want you to understand, this is not gratitude. Gratitude is a separate thing, a private thing, and I'll get to it. This is business. Your work earned this over 18 months while I had no idea whose work it was. He reached into his coat and took out a card and a pen and wrote a number on the back, his cell, and held it out. The gratitude, he said, is just me, finally getting to say thank you. I took the card in my left hand, the one without the scar, and I stood there in the cold over the dark water with the lights moving above me and 31 years of a particular weight on my shoulders, and something shifted. Not like a wall coming down, quieter than that. Like a window opening in a room that had been closed up so long you'd stopped noticing the air. I said, thank you for looking. He nodded once, the way you nod when there's nothing left that needs saying. He went in first. I stayed out there 2 more minutes. And not to pull myself together, because I already was. I just needed those 2 minutes to belong only to me before I carried what had happened back into a room full of people who'd spent the whole evening managing the fact of me. I looked at the scar in the string lights, the long ridge nobody in my family had ever asked about once. Then I went inside. The room was exactly as I'd left it. The little band had picked up the tempo. My aunt was mid-story at the head table, hands going. My uncle was refilling Augustus's wine with the new attentiveness of a man recalculating somebody's importance, and Augustus had sat back down and given absolutely nothing away. He accepted the wine with a polite nod. He laughed at something Beatrice's husband said. He did not announce a single thing. He just sat there and let the silence do the work, and I understood then that he'd done it on purpose, that he'd seen exactly what kind of room this was, and had decided the most powerful thing he could do was nothing at all. My mother was watching him with a new sharpness, the look of a woman who's run enough rooms to know when one has shifted under her and can't tell how. I walked back to my corner table and sat down. The great aunt smiled at me and said something about the flowers, and I agreed they were lovely. And then I laid my right arm flat on the white tablecloth, sleeve up, scar in the candlelight, in the middle of the room where 40 minutes earlier I'd been used as the thing that made everyone else look bright. I didn't hide it. I didn't turn it away. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel the need to make myself smaller. It wasn't triumphant. It was just settled, the way the ground feels solid again after a long time of not trusting it. A chair scraped beside me. Beatrice. I hadn't seen her get up. She sat down in the empty seat that had been next to me all night, and she looked at me with something open in her face I wasn't used to. "Are you okay?" she said. 3 words, the simplest question. The one nobody at that party had thought to ask me until right then. I looked at my cousin in her ivory dress, about to start a whole new chapter of her life, and I smiled, the real one, the one that doesn't have anything to prove. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." She kept looking at me, really looking, then glanced over at Augustus, then back, and I could see a question starting to form behind her eyes that she hadn't known to ask before. Augustus left at the end of the night the way a man leaves when he's done what he came for. He shook my uncle's hand. He kissed my aunt's cheek. He said something to Beatrice's husband that made him laugh. And then, last, he came to me and he shook my hand, a full, deliberate handshake, nothing like the social ones he'd given the rest, and he held my eyes and said, "I'll call you Monday." Nothing else. No explanation for anyone watching, and they were watching. I saw my mother's face working through it, the small shifts, the eyes going from me to the door to my uncle and back, the whole machine running and finding no slot to put it in. Fiona told me. No, Beatrice told me later. In the car on the way home, my uncle asked my aunt, "What on earth did Wren say to Augustus Polini?" And my aunt was quiet a long time and then said, "I don't know." Beatrice said it was the first time in her life she'd heard her mother admit that about anything. My mother called the next morning. I was at the office, because I keep early Sunday hours when I need to think, and I'd needed to. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Her voice was careful in a way I'd never once heard her use on me, the rehearsed casual of someone who'd planned her opening. She asked how I'd enjoyed the party. I said it was lovely. She said it was a beautiful venue. I agreed. These are the little sentences we'd learned to lay between us like planks over a hole. Then she said, "It seemed like you and Augustus had quite a talk." I said we had. Old business acquaintances. There was a pause, and I recognized it even though I'd never heard it from her before. It was the pause of a person recalculating. The same pause I'd watched cross her sister's face the night before. My mother always had her next sentence ready. It was the floor she stood on her whole life. She didn't have it now. Finally, she said, "Maybe we could get lunch sometime, just the 2 of us." I looked out the window at the empty Sunday street. "Maybe," I said. Not yes, not no, just the honest word of someone who's learned that hope without proof is its own kind of bill that comes due. Beatrice called at noon. She didn't open with sorry, and I'm glad, because I wouldn't have trusted sorry. She opened with, "I've known you my whole life, and I realized last night I have no idea what your actual life looks like." She said she'd watched me walk back in from the deck, and my face had been different, and she didn't have a word for it. She said, "Whatever it is you do all day, whatever you've built, I want to know. All of it." It wasn't an apology, it was something smaller and truer, the first real question after a lifetime of not asking. We made a plan for Thursday. Monday morning at 9:30, the email came in from Polini Freight Group. Subject line, "Partnership Proposal, Draft Terms." I read it once, all the way through, Then I forwarded it to my attorney with one line, "Please review and let's talk this week," and I set the phone face down on my desk. The December light came through the windows the way it does down here, low and clear and gold across the floor, across the steel letters of my own name reflected backward on the glass. I didn't need anything else to happen. I wasn't waiting for permission from anyone. I'd known what I built for years. I want to be honest about the rest, because the comments on stories like this always want the family to fall to their knees, and that's not how it went, and I think the truth is better anyway. My mother and I did have that lunch, 3 weeks later, at a diner halfway between us. She cried a little. She said some things that were close to an apology without quite being one, that she'd been hard, that she'd been scared after my father left, that she'd put everything into Beatrice because Beatrice felt like a sure thing, and I had always seemed like I'd be fine without her. I told her that a kid being treated like they'll be fine without you is not the same as a kid being fine. She didn't argue. We're not healed. One lunch doesn't undo 31 years of a wall with no room for me on it, but she's met me at the office now. She stood in front of those steel letters and read my name out loud and went quiet, and that was something. Not everything, something. Beatrice and I have dinner every other week now. She asks questions and listens with her whole face the way she did when we were little and the world was still new to both of us. My uncle sends me articles about the trucking industry now, which is his way. My aunt and I are more careful than warm, and maybe that's where we'll stay, and I've made my peace with that too. Augustus called that Monday like he said he would. We signed the partnership in the spring at his office in Cleveland, 2 copies on a long table and his assistant bringing coffee. And before we picked up the pens, he said, "I'm glad I finally know your name." I said, "I'm glad you asked." Outside the window, the city was gray and busy and ordinary, and I had never felt more solid in my life. I still keep that spiral notebook in my desk drawer, the one with the taped cover and a total at the bottom of every page that never once went read. Some mornings, I open it just to look. The scar's still on my arm. It's not dramatic, honestly, just a shiny ridge most people never notice. On the days I do notice it, I've stopped trying to make it mean something. It's not a symbol. It's just part of the arm I built everything with. The arm that on one cold, foggy morning did the only thing it knew how to do, which was not drive past. Healing isn't a moment. Nobody tells you that. It's a direction. A plain, unglamorous, daily decision to keep walking towards something instead of standing in the wreckage of what hurt you. So if there's something you've built quietly, or something you've carried that the people closest to you never once thought to ask about, leave me a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is there. I read every single one. The morning I drove past that ditch and then stopped anyway, I didn't know I was deciding anything. But I've come to believe that the whole rest of my life turned on that 1 second of not driving past. Everything that happened at that party 3 years later, Augustus standing up, the partnership, my mother's careful voice on the phone the next morning, all of it grew out of a choice I made before the sun was up, when nobody was watching and there was nothing in it for me. That's the thing nobody tells you. The moments that decide who you are almost never come with an audience. I think about cause and effect a lot now. My Aunt Coraline built a beautiful house and a beautiful reputation, and what she got back was a daughter who didn't really know her and a sister she could only ever talk down to. My mother poured everything into the sure thing and called me the charity case, and what she harvested was a daughter who learned to need nothing from her. None of that was bad luck. It was the slow, fair arithmetic of how they chose to treat people. And the same arithmetic worked in my favor. I treated a stranger in a burning car like a human being, and years later that same man treated my company like it mattered because he'd learned firsthand exactly what kind of person ran it. If I could hand one thing to anyone watching, it wouldn't be a story about revenge, because this was never that. It would be 3 quiet habits I had to build because no one built them for me. The first is doing right by people, even when it costs you and even when there's no chance of being seen. Because character formed in private is the only kind that holds up in public. The second is using your head, really looking at how things work, the way I learned routes and loading docks in which owners bled money, because clear thinking is what turns a hard life into a built one instead of just a survived one. And the third is the plain stubbornness to keep going, the spiral notebook with a total that never once went red, the accounting class I failed and retook, the arm I wrapped in a shop rag and kept driving on. None of those three came naturally to me. I built them on purpose, one cold morning at a time. I'm not fully healed with my family, and I've stopped pretending one good night fixes 31 years. My mother read my name off the front of my building and went quiet, and that was something, not everything. Beatrice asks real questions now, and I answer them. That's a beginning, and I've learned to let a beginning just be a beginning. What I know for certain is this. You will not always be in the frame. People will tell rooms who you are before you open your mouth. You can spend your life waiting for them to correct the record, or you can go quietly build something so true that one day the right person looks at the mark on your arm and knows. Be decent when it's hard. Stay sharp. Don't quit. The recognition, if it ever comes, comes last. The person you became to earn it is the part that was always yours.